All right, welcome. Today we are going to dive into one of the most essential concepts in all of programming, Python variables. Seriously, these are the absolute building blocks for pretty much anything you'll ever want to create. So let's get into it. Have you ever stopped to think about how your favorite app somehow remembers your username? Or how a game keeps track of your high score, even after you close it? How does it actually hold on to that information? Well, it all comes down to one simple but super powerful concept: variables. They're basically the program's memory. They let us store, manage, and work with all the data that makes our apps feel alive and interactive. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. What is a variable, really? Probably the best way to picture a variable is to think of it like a labeled container, a box, right? You put some data inside, like the number 10, and then you slap a label on the outside of the box, something like score. From then on, anytime you need that number, you don't have to remember the number itself. You just ask for what's in the score box. It's a super simple way to keep track of all your data. And you know what? Python makes this whole process incredibly simple. You don't need any fancy commands or anything. You just pick a name, use that good old equal sign, which we call the assignment operator, and give it a value. Boom. Just like that, you've created a variable. So let's just quickly break down what's actually happening when you write that single line of code. First, Python creates the data itself, in this case, the text Alice. Then it creates the label, which is name. And finally, that equal sign acts like the glue, linking that label to that piece of data. Okay, so you have a ton of freedom when it comes to naming your variables, but there are a few very strict rules you absolutely have to follow. These aren't suggestions, they're hard-coded right into the Python language. And what happens if you break them? Well, your program will just stop. It'll grind to a halt and throw a syntax error at you. That's basically Python's way of saying, whoa, I have no idea what you're trying to tell me. So yeah, getting these rules right is pretty essential. All right, so here are the big 3 rules you need to burn into your memory. Rule number 1, a variable name has to start with a letter or an underscore. It can never start with a number. Rule number 2, the name can only contain letters, numbers, and underscores. That means no hyphens, no spaces, no exclamation points, nothing fancy. And finally, rule number 3, you can't use a name that Python has already reserved for its own use. Words like class or if are off limits. Oh, and here's a big one that trips up a lot of beginners. You have to remember that Python is case sensitive. That means age with a lowercase a, age with a capital A, and age in all caps. Those are 3 completely separate, different variables as far as Python is concerned. So be super careful with your capitalization. Okay, so we've covered the rules, the stuff the computer forces you to do. But now let's talk about something just as important, the conventions. This is all about what you should do to help other people understand your code. This quote right here from PEP8, that's Python's official style guide, it says it all. Readability counts. The whole point is to write code that doesn't just work, but is also crystal clear to anyone who reads it, including yourself 6 months from now. Yeah, this table really sums it up perfectly. Rules, they're for the computer. You follow them to stop your code from breaking. Conventions, they're for people. You follow them to make your code easy to read and understand. Python won't yell at you for breaking a convention, but trust me, your teammates might. So, what are these conventions? Well, here are the 2 big ones you'll see everywhere. For most of your variables, you'll want to use what's called snake case. That's all lowercase letters with underscores to separate words. But for values that you know are never going to change, what we call constants, the convention is to use all caps with underscores. This is like a big sign to other developers that says, hey, this value is fixed, don't try to change it. All right, that's enough theory. Let's get our hands dirty and see how these variables actually work in practice. And we'll start with the most common type of data you'll ever work with, numbers. So in Python, there are basically 2 main types of numbers you need to know about. First, you've got integers, or int for short. These are just your everyday whole numbers, positive or negative. Then you have floating point numbers, or float. And that's just a fancy name for any number that has a decimal point. Pretty simple, right? And just like you'd expect, you can do all the standard math with these number variables. Addition, subtraction, you name it. Python even respects the order of operations, from back in school. So if you give it 2 plus 3 times 4, it knows to do the multiplication first, giving you 14, which is exactly what you'd want. But there's one little quirk about division in Python that's really important to know. Let me ask you, what do you think you get when you calculate 4 divided by 2? The answer is 2.0. Notice that decimal point? It's a float, not the integer 2 that you might have been expecting.
And that brings us to a super important rule to remember. In Python, the standard division operator, it always gives you back a float. Always. Even if the result is a perfect whole number. This is done on purpose to keep things precise and avoid some common bugs. It's a small detail, but it can save you a lot of headaches later on.
Okay, to wrap things up, let me share a couple of quick pro tips that'll make your code just that little bit better. You know when you're writing a really big number, like a billion, and you can't tell how many zeros there are? Well, Python has this awesome little feature. You can actually put underscores inside your numbers to group the digits, just like you would with commas. When the code runs, Python completely ignores them. But for us humans trying to read the code, oh, it makes a world of difference. The number on the right is so much easier to read. And here's another neat little shortcut. If you need to create a few variables and set them all to the same initial value, you can do it all on one line. It's a really clean and concise way to get things set up. And there you have it. You've now got the keys to storing data in your programs. You know the rules you must follow, the conventions you should follow, and a couple of handy tricks to get you going. The foundation is set, so the only question left is, what are you going to build?